Good morning, everyone, and welcome to Coffee Conversations. We'll let everybody kind of trickle in. I hope you're off to a great morning. We had such a great keynote speaker, and we're just really looking forward to the day. It's a little bit of a gloomy day, so we'll be able to spend some time together and kind of get through the raininess. Welcome. I know people are just going to start coming in. We'll probably have a few more people add on after they come back from their coffee break. So we'll get started here in just a second. We'll hang tight for about 10 more seconds and then we'll get started. All right. Well, good morning, everybody. We got a couple other faces that have come. And welcome to Coffee Conversations Leadership from the Other Side of the Mug. You all may know me. I'm Patrick Brown, director of MACAE, but I am so happy to have a co-host with me this morning, and that is our wonderful friend and colleague at the Leo Workforce Development Adult Education Office, Erica Luce. Erica.
Good morning, everyone. I'm so glad to be joined in this session with Patrick. And, we'll talk a little bit about, our partnership and how much we value, the relationship between the state office and MACAE. But just so excited to see all of you this morning and to have this discussion.
So we thought we might start just because it's a Friday morning. There's a lot happening. It's Halloween. It's Michigan State weekend. Although we just know that Go Blue is going to win, but and we've heard a lot over the days of the conference. And so as a part of just introducing ourselves and sharing a little bit about our work, we also thought we might just share kind of where we're at in life and what's going on, and invite you to share in the chat as well where things are happening with you. So I am happy to go first. I'm, like I said, Patrick Brown, director of MACAE. Our association has over 400 members representing 130 different programs that do adult, alternative, community education, and integrated education and training. We really have strived over the last 18 months to really be a source of resource, of best practice sharing, of networking through one of the most challenging times, certainly in my career, and certainly I know in others as well. And I hope, MACAE, in addition to its work just among our own members, we really try to situate ourselves into both state and national conversations around policy issues that are related to the populations that ultimately we're representing. And so a lot of that is through education, a lot of it's through conversation, a lot of it's through coordination and cooperation with Erica and Krista Johnson and the team there at Leo, but more so often also on the national level with COABE and with the National Alternative Education Association, the National Association of Workforce Professionals. So we really do a lot. And for me on this Friday, I am hoping for a big win tomorrow for Michigan. But also just really grateful for this opportunity to gather together in the conference. Certainly we would have loved to have it be in person, but until that time when it's safe or safer, we'll have to make the most of this opportunity. And just, I've been so grateful just that everyone's tuning in, everyone's trying to get in where they can. I know you're being pulled in many directions, and sometimes have an earbud in one webinar and an earbud in another webinar, or to the phone, or to your participants and staff. So really appreciate you taking the time to be here. Erica?
All right. Well, and I'll just kind of take a minute and introduce, I know seeing the names that I know many of you on the call, but I think there could be, a few others that may be joining that maybe not be as familiar with our office. So as Patrick said, I'm Erica Luce, and I'm the adult education manager for adult education within the Michigan Department of Labor and Economic Opportunity Workforce Development, so often referred to as Leo WD. And you might also hear workforce development as part of employment and training. I know that acronyms and the changes at the state may be tough to keep up with. But I think it's really important just to highlight, within employment and training, we now have all of the core programs under the Workforce Innovation Opportunity Act, or WIOA. So we're partnered with the Michigan Rehabilitation Services and Bureau of Services for Blind Persons, as well as workforce development. So within WD, it's many of the programs that support workforce development, such as, those WIOA Title I and III that go through the Michigan Works Agency. We also have our migrant seasonal farm workers. We have the Perkins and industry engagement team. So there are a lot of different services and partners that we have the opportunity to collaborate more closely with how we're structured in the state office. And so I think that that's really important for everyone to be aware of. And there's been a lot of depth in those conversations and with various partners. And so that's something that I continue to be engaged in. I think that we have a leadership team, not only within WD, but also within our state department that really values the services that we provide and try to connect adult education programming with a number of different services or programs within the department that could be beneficial. For example, whether it's apprenticeships, we've seen the launch of the Futures for Frontliners program this year, connections to, Reconnect and how we can align those services and others. And so I think that that's something that's really been encouraging to know that the work that we do each and every day is valued. And so I just, wanted to share a little bit about myself for those that may not know. I have been in the state for the different iterations of our department for about 17 years. My degree is in economics. And so I actually, from Michigan State, a proud Spartan alumni, and I started in state government as a labor market analyst for the Lansing area and Ann Arbor areas. I covered doing things like the unemployment rate, occupational forecasts, and that. And I love data, but I didn't feel that connection to people and how I was making a difference. And so one of the things, kind of saw a position pop up within adult education. When I first started, it was doing a distance learning pilot for women that were receiving public assistance that were pregnant in their third trimester to help them earn their GED at a distance. And they were exempt from the work requirements. It was this really great pilot. That was the first I really had been exposed to adult education, and it really hooked me and drew me in. And at times I felt like a fish out of water because I didn't come from an education background. I came from a workforce background. But I feel like in some ways those skills had prepared me for trying to see how we can fit in the big picture and align our services. So I've had a lot of different opportunities within our office and different initiatives I've worked on, from our mayors and our data collection to being part of the monitoring team. And then also working on special initiatives and instruction and career pathways to look at how we can do things differently in adult education to better meet our students' needs, but also, to prepare them for that next step. I've heard throughout my time in adult education, really that emphasis and that culture shift around a high school diploma or equivalency is no longer enough. So how are we preparing them not only for, that credential that they need or those skills, but then also that next step that they're going into. And so, within our office, we're responsible for oversight of both the state and federal funding that Michigan receives for adult education. So that's Section 107 of the state school aid, as well as Title II of the Workforce and Innovation Opportunity Act, and then also high school equivalency testing. We're responsible as well, and a few other initiatives that have been thrown our way, the 23+ high school diploma program and the Futures for Frontliners Path 2. So a lot of exciting things. I think, you've seen many of our team represented at the MACAE conference, and hopefully you've had a chance to get to know them, but just want you to always know that we're here as a support for all of you. So I hope that if you ever have questions or concerns, feel free to reach out to either myself or someone on our team, and we'll be happy to have a conversation with you.
Erica. And she is wording for the Wolverines tomorrow, I heard.
No, not a chance. And I had to wear my MSU. I know usually I feel like you should present or be dressed up, but it's just fitting for today.
It is. Erica, I think that we jumped right in because we were so eager to have this conversation. And I think we missed Maha giving some important announcements. So Maha, I don't know if you had any announcements that you needed to share with everyone.
You were both at it, so I just kind of left it alone. So good morning, everyone. I am Maha Ayub, the Assistant Supervisor of Dearborn Adult and Community Ed. I'll be moderating the session today, but we have Patrick here, so it's like he can do all of this. But anyhow, I'm very happy to be moderating this session with Erica and Patrick, and I wore green, blue, and yellow, so I have no preference. This is all inclusive. But I just wanted to let you know, if you have any questions, please leave them in the chat. In Zoom or in Hova, we'll be monitoring the questions. There will be some time in between. Erica and Patrick will stop, take some questions. So please go ahead and leave them there, but there will be time for Q&A, I think halfway through and maybe at the end. So if you have any questions, like I said, in either platform, we'll be checking both of them. Thank you again, everyone, for being here today. Okay, go ahead, Patrick.
Always need someone to keep us on track here. So as we're kind of moving forward, you know, the theme of today's session really started from a conversation that Erica and I had over coffee virtually, and you'll see the evolution of that project in many different ways. But really, our vision for today is really to talk about and give an overview of some of our shared work priority areas. We really feel strongly that we need to have a strong working and collaborative relationship between our state association and the department, both broadly of LEO, but particularly obviously our adult education focus in the office there. Also sharing some of the strategic goals that each of our agencies have. We each are going through the process of a strategic planning, and Erica will talk about that with her team in a moment. And the ultimate goal then is to really be able to just communicate and share what our strategic vision is and goals for each of our respective agencies, and then focus on some next steps for future project areas and investment areas. And I'm hopeful that as a kind of a product of this, you'll share with us your insights and your thoughts about ways that we can continue to collaborate together that have worked very well, other areas that we might, you know, want to look at in our conversations, and then bringing our teams together to be able to talk about collaborative spaces. So please, like Maha said, if you've got questions, comments, pop them in the chat, and Eric and I will stop periodically. And then hopefully we don't have a whole laid in content, but hopefully at the end we'll have some time for just both Q&A and just some general conversation amongst ourselves as well.
Yeah, so I think what's important for this discussion is, you know, just to start with from the state perspective, and not only priorities for the adult education system, but really taking a step back and looking at, you know, our broader department priorities and vision and how adult education fits into that. And so being mindful that that's something that we're always from the state office, you know, trying to be aware of and navigate both within our office and for the field. And so, as I mentioned, you know, we have within the Office of Adult Education, we're housed within the Michigan Department of Labor and Economic Opportunity, often referred to as LEO. And employment and training is what brings together, you know, the workforce development, MRS, and Bureau of Services for Blind Persons. And that vision for those entities is really to make sure that Michigan is a place where all people, you know, businesses and communities have the educational and economic means to reach their full potential. And so we've identified a few priority areas or goals that really lead and capture the work that all of the entities within our department do. And that's, you know, investing in the closure of equity gaps. There's a strong focus on that in recent years and will continue into the future. And so, you know, closely tied to that is removing barriers to employment, and, you know, building those equitable career pathways to high wage careers. And so that's a key emphasis, not just building career pathways, but pathways that lead to high wage careers. And supporting the governor's 60 by 30 goal, which is a goal to have 60% of Michiganders to have a post-secondary credential by the year 2030. And so what I would say, you know, when we look at each of those areas, those are exactly what adult education has been focused on and continues to focus on. And so we fit, you know, within the core mission very well in that. And I think, you know, as an office, these have been priorities that we have been focused on, you know, for the last few years. But, you know, really key in there is how we can make sure that we're increasing the number of individuals that have, you know, that secondary credential. whether it's the high school diploma or high school equivalency. And so, just wanting to share that while we're focused on these areas, the services that we do in adult education, making sure we have those high quality services that are focused on, the best research that's available, to make sure that we're meeting students where they are and continuing to help them on their way. And so, I just share that for the perspective of where we're approaching these conversations.
Likewise, MACAE also, has a very articulated vision and set of priorities. And what I hope you'll see is kind of the mirroring the parallel work being done here, and then ultimately kind of the shared vision as well. But really, what we focused on over the last 2 years in our strategic planning has been to look at the alignment of our work with already established statewide initiatives. How do we fit into that? What's our role within that space? How do we ask for clarification or definition of what conversations around equity and inclusion, economic prosperity, what does that mean? How does it look like? And where do the populations that we serve fit within those conversations? Certainly, as if you've been involved with us, we really try to be a collective space for networking and engagement, and really kind of the nitty gritty, and really a space for sharing of actual tools and templates, best practices. And I'll be honest, we've struggled with how do we create that repository of resources and spaces. And this is a conversation that Eric and I have had numerous times as well, for the entire state to have access to. And how do we keep that updated and maintained? And so we're continuing to evaluate that and to look at, what's the best platforms to do that? Who are the best providers to be able to help us to do that? But that's certainly a priority for us going forward, and continue to kind of develop that and roll out. Certainly platforms like Whova create a great space where everything's just in one area, but we're looking at more long-term structures for that. Certainly part of our work is to be advocates. I believe that everyone's invested. There's a difference between advocacy and lobbying, right? Advocacy is really being a voice and articulating the needs and concerns of the populations that you serve. And certainly MACAE does that in trying to be an advocate for equitable and resourceful policies. We have a lot of conversations around that in our conversations between MACAE and Leo leadership there. But also then articulating the intersectionality of what we do with so many other projects. Oftentimes the population that we served is touched, and it does intersect with other initiatives and other statewide programs, with other associations that are doing like-minded work, other departments. And so we try to be a bridge and be a helpful guide and a resource in those conversations, a leader in some of those dialogues, and just try to be kind of a third party facilitator in many of those conversations. And then certainly one of the project areas that we are focused on as we continue to go forward is quality assurance, not only for us within our association of ourselves, but also the providers that we're representing, making sure that we have an understanding, a baseline of what are the quality resources that are needed, what are the quality navigation or support services that our families need that we serve through our providers and our programs. And ultimately, if there are any additional resources that people might need. And then what are the procedures and the processes that we're following to make sure that we are delivering ultimately the best service that we can, the highest quality service for the people that we're trying to meet us, that oftentimes have so many barriers to getting to our doors in the first place. So before we move ahead, I think Eric and I wanted to take some questions at this time.
Maha, were there any questions?
Yes, well, there was a question from Oogie, and I think Patty had chimed in. His question was, how does the department define equity? Is there a focus on equity or equality?
Great question. Yeah, it's definitely been a focus on equity versus equality. And I would say it's an area too that, we have within Leo, there is an equity and inclusion officer. There's also a task force that has been working on this effort, both with external stakeholders and then bringing that information back to at the department level, having a number of series of meetings of lunch and learns and webinars so that we can be better informed in our work around some of these topics. So I'd say that this is definitely an area that we continue to learn in, and I'm, just sharing where we're at now. But it's really been a conversation about, how we can ensure, for one, looking at the data and looking at underrepresented groups that may not have had access to our programs or may not be as well represented in certain programs, and how we can better support them, and looking at the needs of groups may be different. So it may not just be, for example, the cost of college, but what support services and wraparound services are there to help those students be successful, that may not have had access prior. And it's really looking at, the data and what the data is telling us and how we're evaluating those programs. So, I think that that's something that we're also looking at from a policy perspective, as well as making sure, evaluating any policies that we have that can better ensure equity and access to programs and services. And then once individuals are within those programs, how we can ensure that they're successful and we can meet them where they're at and provide those services. So that's been a lot of the conversation to date. And again, many conversations will continue in that area.
I don't see any other questions in either chat, unless somebody has a question, if they wanted to unmute and ask a question directly, but there are no more questions in the chat.
Actually, I do have my hand raised.
Okay, sorry, go ahead. Is it Christian?
Yes.
Go ahead, please.
Yeah. Speaking to what y'all were talking about as far as advocacy and lobbying, I think we're doing all right job with advocacy. Lord knows we're vocal, but I just feel like, how do we increase our power as far as lobbying? Because I was actually teaching this, and I've been hitting this hard with my with my students in social studies. Politicians really only listen to two things: money and numbers, specifically number of people.
Question, Christian, and it's good to see you. Thanks for joining us this morning. I'll go first and just say, from the MACAE standpoint, when we do have conversations with policymakers, it's usually often directed to MACAE, either, I will say, in partnership with our Office of Adult Education, if there's questions that we can be helpful on, but usually around a particular issue. And so what the approach that we take is often education and awareness first, because many of our policymakers, and I'll just say even the general public, is very unaware of all of the benefits, or even the different types of programming that adult education even provides. Right? I mean, there really is still a general, not to be too general, but there is really a mindset of, oh, you do GED night school. Well, there are so many other program facets. There's so many other assets and aspects of adult education, adult skill building, as well as kind of integrating that with workforce development and leading to post-secondary, that we kind of have to go through this process of educating them. Usually, generally about the types of programming that adult education offers. Then it kind of evolves into a conversation around funding. And Christian, and others know, our funding structure here in Michigan is complex, to probably would be the word that I would say. And so there's an additional then layer of education, right, around different types of funding streams, those that are publicly funded through the public school system, those that also receive WIOA funding, those that receive maybe a combination of both, those that receive maybe the Section 107 career technical education programming, and all of those different facets and the intersectionality of them. And so that's where we usually start in that process, is that education and awareness piece. And in many ways, once we go through that process, and what that can look like is several conversations or meetings with either the policymaker themselves or with their office, they generally then have a better sense of where it situates, and that usually helps to move any conversation along. I have found that typically people are just not vested in understanding the program. And that's part of, I think, the responsibility and the work of all of us as workers within the field, as advocates, as proponents of adult education, as professionals. But certainly that's one of the priorities and responsibilities of MACAE as the association, to help be a vehicle to advance some of those conversations.
So when you say that they're not vested, that means that they don't know, or they don't know and don't want to know.
Typically, I would say the majority just don't have an understanding, or the understanding that they thought they had is not completely accurate. And so we try to bring them to the light a little bit, and to I'll give you a perfect conversation that I had with a policymaker over the summer. They had questions around adult skill building as it relates to Futures for Frontliner programming. And they said, well, doesn't Futures for Frontliners specifically target adult skill building? And I said, yes. However, we've created Pathway 2, which is a singular pathway and option. All of our other pathways currently don't provide an on-ramp or an avenue, or have a minimum threshold of having to have a high school diploma or equivalency. And so there is this gap area then between those that don't have a high school equivalency, or those that aren't preparing for that at this time, and trying to on-road and enter into those programs. And it was this was a policymaker that was a huge proponent for that type of programming. And it was kind of eye-opening for them to say, oh, well, that I thought that we were reaching people that didn't have access to educational training programs. But I guess we haven't looked at going far enough, or reaching deeply enough, or reaching more vertically down into those populations. So that was just one of an awareness piece, that they already thought that they were providing access, maybe an on-ramp. And the on-ramp is there. It's just when you don't have the signs directing people to the on-ramp, they're not going to know how to access that. So that's been a part of more often, at least that I have seen, is that oftentimes and part of that too is the rotation of the legislator, right? We have term limits within our state. And so we have, you can run 6 years in both the House and the Senate. That's really, when you think about it, it's a quick turnover, right? And so there's not that, by the time you get that vested knowledge around a particular issue, oftentimes you're either running for the next campaign, or you're going to be exiting and leaving office. Erica, I don't know if you want to address this from your perspective.
I think the only thing that I would add, and it's more just from an awareness and from the conversations that we've had, whether it be with others within our department, like you said, there is a lack of understanding of what we truly do in adult education and who we serve. And I think the more that we can have not only success stories, but really stories that portray the variety of students and backgrounds. And, I think people often just, their mind goes to, when they hear adult education, think of someone that dropped out of high school. For one, there's a number of reasons that individuals dropped out of high school. And for two, there could be, when you say, it could be a friend, a family member, a neighbor, a colleague, there's so many individuals that we serve, talking about our English language learners, single parents, but those that also have been very successful, but now maybe need that credential to go back and continue. We're seeing a lot of that in career changes. So I think the more that we can provide that picture for people, because I think that there's a lot of assumptions, like Patrick said, about what we do and who we serve in adult education. But the more that we can really show that full picture to connect with individuals. And I think the other piece of that is, even as we have these great opportunities, we build these programs, and we know there's a need out there, but we don't always connect with students that need our services and get them to enroll. And I think that one of the things we struggle with at the state level, and look to all of you and your input, and especially that have been more successful, is whether it's the wording, the language, the format, how we reach out and connect those individuals. And I think that we would communicate, that with Futures for Frontliners, that jumps to my mind first. We had this marketing team, but they were marketing free college And we kept saying our students generally aren't going to connect with that or think that that's for them because they don't always see themselves as college material. We hear so often, even though, they can, but often that's not where they're viewing themselves. So if that's what we're using to say, hey, come take advantage of this program, we need to make sure that the way that we're trying to reach out and share and, announce these opportunities is done in a way that, really connects with the population that we're trying to serve. So I think those are two areas when we talk about, advocacy, to me, that we've identified as gaps that we're trying to improve on.
Thanks, Christian, for that question.
All right, thank you. Thank you. And one thing is that let me formulate my words correctly. Like, since coming to adult education, it really, like, my eyes were opened up as well, just how much that we do for not just the community and for these students, but people should realize that since if there's such a focus on K-12, this benefits the K-12 students too. Like, not to hijack it, but like now I'm realizing it's kind of a personal mission for me. Like, my own mother went from getting a GED and being a single parent and dropping out and getting her GED to becoming a college professor.
Story, Christian. And you're so right. And I think that not to speak too much for Erica, but I think in our respective roles, we really feel like that's a responsibility and something that's a priority for both of our agencies, is to demonstrate the return on investment for some of this programming and really looking at the data, both numerical outcomes and measurable outcomes, but what are some of the other outcomes that are a little bit harder to measure, but certainly are just as impactful, like what you're talking about in terms of the return on investment for increasing generational literacy, the impact on the community, maybe home buying purchases or consumerism that's increased by our participants that are gaining employment. All of those assets and facets of it that are related as a byproduct of the work that we do. So I think that's a definite priority and of importance. So I appreciate you raising that. Erica, did you want to talk a little bit about, as we shift to talk about what are some of the priority goals and focus projects that we've been working on?
Yeah, absolutely. And this is, one that's obviously very important to both of our organizations, is professional development. And so just wanted to highlight the way that our office has been partnering with MACAE. Our office is required to offer professional development to adult education programs in the state. And we also recognize there's a number of entities that are doing that, MACAE being one, and then also regionally and locally. And so we've really had a mission to make sure that our professional development supports and strengthens others that are happening in the state. And so we have a contractor, EDSI, as many of you are aware, that is helping us meet the requirements that we have to deliver professional development, but also really to partner with MACAE in that effort. And so we meet regularly to discuss, a lot of our conversations center around topics. What are some of the things? Often we are bringing what we're hearing nationally, whether it's from our federal office or national conferences that we want to make sure that we're sharing with providers in the state. But then also trying to merge that with what we're hearing locally as some of the challenges and gaps in what may be currently available. So how we can ensure that the professional development topics, but then also obviously in these, unique and constantly changing times, the format and the delivery, not only, that can mean whether we're doing things in person, whether we're doing them virtually, but also are we doing shortened sessions, knowing that teachers and administrators have so much coming at you and so much that you're trying to figure out locally as far as your planning and your programming, you may not have time to sit in a full day session. So you might want, professional development that's shortened. So I think that we're really trying to have discussions around all of those aspects. And the more that we can share our experiences from each of our organizations and the feedback that we're getting, I think that it should improve, the professional development that we're offering to the field.
I would just add that we are trying to get to a space of having a balanced calendar, if you will, that really is impactful to you making programmatic decisions, either in your budget or just in your planning for staffing of where do I have resources or the time that it takes for people to go to. Recently, and I want to say that this year has been a little bit different, but MACAE over the last couple of years has tried to develop an annual calendar of our delivery of options, and in many ways that has been delayed off and on by COVID. But that's been an intentional part as a part of these conversations, and just as a part of things that we have heard from providers too, is to say we need to have a uniform professional development calendar or balanced calendar that shows some of the offerings so that we can start to plan ahead for them and not always just take advantage of one-off opportunities that come up as they do, which can be very valuable, but be a little more strategic with it and think a little more long-term as well.
Yeah, and I would echo the same. We've heard that. And I think Patty, on our team that leads professional development, it is vocal on that, every time we have conversations about that. So again, we started to do plans because of COVID, obviously not sure if they're going to be in person. Are you delaying them? Are you doing the full? So again, trying to shift some of that as well. But I think that what we're trying to do at the state level, as well as, with that plan for not only the year, but 3 to 5 years out. So when we talk about our priorities, we want to make sure that the professional development that we're offering is aligned with the priorities that we have. And so that everything is building to that and moving in that same direction.
One of the other areas that we work on very consistently, I think, is really around policy recommendations and trying to streamline and better understand the processes that it takes not only to administer programs and the support and the resources that are needed with it, but what are the policies that are needed to allow both ensure flexibility for program delivery and most importantly, access for participants, but also having that accountability piece, which is so important as well, to ensure that we do have quality service of programs that are delivering quality programs, and how are we measuring that, and are we measuring that? And so in our policy conversations that we have, we do look at sharing our statistical information. I think we're going to talk about some of the mayor's information that we have and process, but really also looking at some of the policy guidelines, like the testing accommodations, assessment policy changes. You pick a topic, and we probably have touched upon it at some point or another as an issue. I will say that adult education is very nuanced. Some of the policy parameters, and if you had a guidebook, it'd probably be hundreds of pages long in terms of addendums and modification to the original policy or a flexibility around this particular issue. And so sometimes these conversations can be complex, but it's really important to try to move the whole needle forward. And around that as well, what we've really tried to focus on, and I know for us at MACAE, we try to compare our communication strategies and try to have consistent information. We don't want to be sharing redundant information. If you get it from Leo on Monday, we don't want you to get the same information on Wednesday. It's just not conducive. But it is conducive when we're trying to reach around really important topics and issues. And so we do try to share that information in our weekly bulletins that go out on the MACAE side, but also in our newsletters that are going out. I know Leo, Erica they have a newsletter that goes out as well. And we try to ground that information and make sure that it's consistent, that we're sharing that information, that if deadlines are approaching, that we're consistent with making sure that the verbiage is correct on that we're not oversharing on, the possibility of something, and that we're just being very clear and making sure, because we do know that people get information from both sources, and just making sure that it's on point and on target, and that we're keeping each other abreast too of all the things that we're doing and the events that we have going on, or some of the challenges or conversations that are raised, or concerns, particularly around policy and questions that we get. Oftentimes, I know many people reach out, and I'll, copy the respective staff member at the adult ed office, say you really should talk to them for a little more clarity and on this particular policy issuance. If you have a particular question, they're very helpful in that in many regards.
Yeah, and I think I would just add from the state office perspective, this is a critical focus for where we need the partnership with MACAE around policy and recommendations. And I think for one, what's important for us is to be as transparent as we can so the field understands why. You know, we may not always agree, and there will be conversations that we have as far as recommendations from either side that we don't agree with. But we just want to make sure that MACAE and the field understand why we're doing something. And so generally a policy is put in place when there's an issue that's come up or a challenge or additional guidance needed to ensure there's consistency in how we're operating. And so I think if we can communicate and then have conversations about this is what we're proposing, I think where we really value the input from MACAE and the field is so that we can understand the impact of those changes before we put them in place. So if we were to put a policy in place, so hey, this is what we're looking at doing, this is the issue we're having, so this is what we're proposing. I think, you know, oftentimes, and we understand many times we get recommendations from a program, and that's really a recommendation for a policy that would benefit their program. So we're trying to look at the statewide perspective and that, you know, variances in how programs are delivered in different areas of the state and how, you know, different populations of students that are served as well. And so I think this is where we really appreciate being able to bounce ideas off. I know that our team has been great at that over the last couple of years. I believe, you know, in making changes to our assessment policy when the pandemic first started, looking at an online ALP, you know, shifting that, changes that we've made to the MERS system. Oftentimes we'll reach out to programmers or different programs that, you know, maybe working more strongly with some of those issues or have connections with, but making sure that we have, you know, that partnership with MACAE means that we're getting perspective from a number of different programs in the state. So it's something that we really value.
I would just say too, this is a good plug for, you know, if you are a MACAE member to check in with those Monday updates, which we do send them out consistently for kind of what's happening this week or what's happening in the short term. But also Leo has a monthly newsletter that goes out. And so it is important to look for that and to open that and to read that, to much of the, I'll just say much of the questions or conversations that come up are often there is some linkage or resource that could be found in that newsletter. So I would encourage everyone, if you're not signed up for that, we can certainly share the Adult Ed website, but you could go there and sign up as well. Make sure that you're getting the most up-to-date information from them as well. Would you agree with that, Erica? Yeah,
absolutely. We did make it possible on our website, you know, at the bottom, like Patrick said, that you can just go to and there's a link that says want to get information about adult education, you know, you can sign up for the listserv. And I think that, yeah, that's something that we're continually struggling with is we have these through Gov Delivery, we send out our notifications, we're creating just a directors list as well, because we found sometimes directors leave and then they're not on that list. So I think that's the struggle, is making sure that when we're sending our communication out, that we're ensuring that we have the latest email addresses for directors. And this is where I'm just going to plug and say that please double and triple check that the information that you put into your MEGS applications and coming up your Nexus applications, that's where we pull your contact from. And so oftentimes people will say, oh, their email is wrong, or it's not, and it's like, that's what you have in the system. And so just make sure that that's accurate. So when we pull that for those lists, that we have the latest and greatest.
Make sure those I's are not L's, right? That's exactly. So one of the other major areas that we have focused on and started to meet quarterly on is around mayors. And certainly this has always been a priority to analyze performance and to look at data, but to really kind of dig into it in terms of the impacts and the implications from COVID-19, and to really be realistic about what we're seeing, trends, both in maybe loss of enrollment and things of that nature, or increases, And so we do meet quarterly to review that information. And as a part of that, we've been working, and Sue Johnson is so critical and such a strong component of this, is to really do a quartile analysis of some outcomes across multiple years and to really try to graph the direction of programming to see if there are trends across multiple years that we can see and that we can identify. And then better inform both, like we were just talking about, the policy and the communications that we have around particular issues or the technical assistance that might come from that. Certainly one of the projects that we're working on now, and we're going to be meeting again soon. So Erica and I have our marching orders of information that we've committed to bringing back to our mayor's team meeting, is identifying high performing programs across multiple years and really digging into what programming they offer, maybe what resources that they've had available, looking at some of the staffing, looking at, just the resources that they have that maybe have afforded them the chance to be able to be a high performing program consistently, and really kind of digging into that and seeing if we can pull out what our best practices that we could promote through professional development or other resources. But then also conversely, looking at any gap or challenge areas. If you've been in adult education since we moved to the regional model, we have seen a slow trickle of programs at the local level, especially on the Section 107 side, perhaps close. And so we really want to try to target that and really identify if there are ways that we can provide technical assistance. And I know that word sounds alarming at times, but when we talk about technical assistance, what we're talking about is really a general understanding of what's going on the ground. What are the, like I just said, for the high performing programs, what are the gap areas maybe in resources or staffing? And that's where the regional model really comes into play, is how can we make sure that we're allocating resources and making sure that we're really helping to target those programs that maybe haven't meet their benchmarks. Often when we dig into that, a part of that is maybe a change in leadership, maybe a change in experienced staff, maybe onboarding of new staff, not understanding, maybe a lack of connection to professional development or communication. And so we're really going to be identifying those over the last couple of years, their project, and really kind of working towards identifying and pulling out some of those gap areas and best practices.
Yeah, and I think this is a piece, rightly, Sue Johnson and Brian Fraser on our team, and I meet weekly on our mayor system, and Sue has been instrumental in creating quarterly spreadsheets, and they continue to grow because our team will meet and review them, and we'll be, oh, I wonder this, or we bring in the finance team so that as we're reviewing grants that have been drawn down, well, do they have students there? So we can kind of look at the full picture of data to support the work of everyone on our team. And so we have these great spreadsheets that we update. Sue Johnson updates each quarter and then shares out with the group. And I think one of the things that we were looking for, though, now that we have the data, it would be great to understand the stories or some trends that may be happening locally that fill in maybe why we're seeing certain things with that data. And so I think that's been really helpful as we bring in Patrick and Tammy and we review the data, having a handle on maybe the conversations that are going on, some of the challenges. And so that as we're looking at that, just the numbers themselves, we see a full picture of what's going on. And so again, as Patrick mentioned, it's so important to be able to identify then not only what seems to be working well, maybe there are areas of the state that are, having a handle on certain things that we can learn from and share with others, but really those gaps and challenges for technical assistance. Sue has a pretty good handle on that based on questions that come into the mayor's help desk. If we start seeing a number of programs that ask about this, we need to make sure that we're doing training on it. We may have think we have that covered because we put out some information in the newsletter or said that this change was happening, but if we're still getting questions, if we need to do something again. But then also, are there specific areas as well as how we're delivering services that we should be providing technical assistance on? So again, We really appreciate this. And I just want to make sure everyone in the field knows we are reviewing this data. I don't want you to think you just put data in MAERS and no one ever looks at it. We review it all the time. So appreciate those that are timely with their data entry, because as we're reviewing it, it's only as good as what's in the system to help us understand what's going on. So
I would just add to that too, going back to Christian's earlier question and comment, is that information then becomes very critical when we start to have conversations around future investment areas or reallocation of resources and things of that nature. That information and data becomes very critical and a component of that conversation for us to go to and help articulate both the challenges and needs of providers, but more importantly of the participants they serve, but also some of the successes that we see and some of the strong points of the types of programs that we do. That oftentimes that component becomes a critical part of the conversation, is to really say, okay, where are you at? What are the metrics that you have that programs are responsible for meeting? And what's the information and data that you can share with us in real time that would help to demonstrate that?
yeah, and I'm glad you said that, Patrick. That just reminded me, if you haven't already, if you're not familiar, if you're a director and you're not familiar, or a teacher, with the statewide performance report, this was a new report that we are required to submit. Actually, all the core programs under WIOA have to submit to the federal departments by October 1st of each year. But what I love about that report is that's the only one that we have that not only breaks out who we're serving by demographics. So you see the categories of, male, female, age demographics, race, ethnicity, and the barriers to employment. But then you also see how they're performing across each of those core indicators. So that's the only report that brings together those different demographic groups with performance. So we can quickly see who, are there certain groups of students that are not as successful, and is there something that we can do to better support them? For example, maybe we see single parents, are less likely to complete the program. Do we offer, or leverage existing resources around childcare or things? So I think those reports, again, like Patrick is saying, are so important to help tell the story, not only where we're doing well, but where, if we need additional funding, where it should be focused to help us succeed. So I think those are important pieces to pull together.
I know we're coming to the end of our time here in just a little bit, but we wanted to just share with you an opportunity here. Erica and I launched about a year and a half ago now, adult education coffee conversations, and they're short 30-minute informal conversations with both Erica and I to keep a pulse of what's happening on the ground. We've found them so informative and really helpful, reflective for us as we're having conversations, not just between ourselves, but among our teams, looking at what resources, professional development, communication, policy conversations. It helps just to raise the level of awareness for us, to bring up topics, to make sure that we're hitting the mark and making sure that we're kind of just keeping update. But really, it's also a time for you all to share what's going on in your programs. If you got challenges that you're experiencing, questions that we can really identify and raise, I'll just say anecdotally, a couple of the questions that have come up, we've been able to answer in real time and just say, oh, well, here's the resource or link that you need. And then people have said, oh, I've been waiting, I've had this question and I just wasn't sure. And so that's another wonderful opportunity there. And then really highlighting your program. Part of the pandemic has limited us in our ability to be mobile and to come out and visit programs and talk with you or be at a conference and share what's happening, what bright spots are happening. So that's been another benefit for us, is we want to know what's happening. What are the good news through all of this that you are able to share? And so we've completed about 20 coffee conversations. We're relaunching this for this new program year, and we've got a couple of dates available. But is there anything, Erica, while I'm putting the link in the chat, that you'd like to add about this?
Yeah, I think that I would just say, well, we started it, really at the height of the pandemic to really get a handle on what was happening locally and what were the challenges, where they might need guidance. Then we start to shift to what are the bright spots, what have I learned, and then how things were changing. But I would say it's always from from both Patrick and I, these conversations are from perspective of us wanting to learn. Like, we just want to hear from you and know that each local program is different. And I know we've had a couple that were like, oh no, why did I get picked? Or why did you want to meet with me? Did I do something wrong? And it truly is not. It's just an opportunity to have that conversation. And it's not meant to be anything formal. We can take the conversation, wherever a director would like to go with it. If they have something they'd like to share, like Patrick said, if it's a success you'd like to highlight, something different, but just to understand what's going on across the state. I think that they've been, extremely helpful. And I try to take things back, to our team within the office. If there's something unique, I'm like, oh, did you know so-and-so is doing this? Or, they're having this issue, we might need to make sure that we're connecting to make sure we can answer it. So I appreciate them. And I hope that it's something that people will take advantage of, because it's just, again, another way for us to stay connected to what's happening locally.
Bring your cup of coffee. Erica and I do when we are very intentional about that. It is it's a water cooler conversation. And that's really sparked from, we were missing those opportunities to get updates from local providers on what's happening. So I just wanted to share with you quickly. I've shared a link. We've got a couple of dates between now and the end of 2021. I cannot believe that we're almost at the end of the year. But Eric and I have about 4 dates on the calendar here. If you're interested in joining us for a coffee conversation, we set it up. It's on Zoom. We'll send you the link. We do ask that you're, obviously, if you're a director, that you're there. You're welcome to invite other members of your team if you'd like. We do keep it to 30 minutes. So we do try to, kind of keep that, because we know everyone's time is important. If you are not a program director, certainly I would connect with them. We've already met, like I said, with about 20 programs over the course of last year, but you could go in there, save this link if you want. We can certainly also send it out again. But we've got about 4 dates between now and the end of the year if you're interested in just meeting with us and having a conversation.
Patrick, I hate to interrupt, but I have a question maybe. Erica, do you know when folks from the office will be able to visit and speak with our students? I think for us, we've been really trying to empower our students and their voice. And I think sometimes it's not as powerful coming from us, or it is more, it may be viewed a little bit different when you're speaking to 7 moms and they have some challenges and it's not coming, from us. It's really been an emphasis for a few years to actually sit and listen to our students and their stories. I know through the pandemic, haven't had the ability to get out into the field. Any updates on when that would happen again?
Yeah, great question, Oogie. And while we're still working remotely, we do have the ability now to go out and travel for work as needed. And so there are some members within our office. We have done, a few events, but absolutely, we do have that ability now to come out and attend events if needed. So just welcome those invitations.
Thank you.
Invite us out, Oogie. Eric and I loved a road trip. We can we road tripped out to Battle Creek, I think, before the pandemic.
That's
So
right.
Probably coordinate something like that as well. Do you want to, Erica, kind of close us out with what we're seeing and hearing and kind of next steps?
Sure. And I know that we've, touched on some of this, but something that we have heard and will continue to prioritize within our office is that clear and consistent communication, making sure that we are, what's going on in policies and all those, important things that we think that providers need to know. We've heard on resources that may be valuable, so we'll continue to work on that, as well as policy, and continue to provide, the direction, not only on why we put something in place, but hopefully to help understand the intent and purpose of that. But something I think most that I hear and I value is really to have opportunities to share best practices, to come together. And obviously, if we can't be in person, doing it virtually, but just getting people together. We have so much knowledge, expertise, and I'm blown away by, the stories and experiences, whenever we do come together. So giving people that ability to connect with their colleagues and learn from, so that we can all improve what we're, offering to our students is so important.
Well, thank you all. I know that our time is coming away, and I want to be sure that we let you know we're committed to continuing to work together. We've also, you should know more broadly, brought our staff together at least once between the MACAE board and our staff, and as well as the Leo Adult Ed staff as a whole. I think we're committed to doing that again. Certainly working at supporting the field through communication, opportunities for collaboration, like Erica said, but also focus on the future. And again, looking at that professional development, really looking at possible investments as they relate to some statewide initiatives as they target that population that we serve so critically, and how our populations can be included in those conversations, or maybe need to be included in future programming that's announced or opportunities that are announced, especially for career and training opportunities and educational outcomes. So positive note there as we kind of look to the future. I know we don't have time necessarily for additional questions, but certainly Erica and I are always accessible. Please reach out to us. If there are questions in the chat, I will be intentional about going back and making sure that we can address those, and I'll share those with Erica. But I would just say, please reach out to us. It's important to us that we have this conversation and that we keep talking, and we will continue and commit to continuing to work together on behalf of the field.
Absolutely. So thank you. Go green.
Go blue, Erica.
I had to get that in.
Well,
Yay,
thank you
go
all.
green.
Kimberly, oh no, you're supposed to say go blue. Well, thank you all. We'll be in touch.
you.
Bye-bye. Thank you, Erica.
Thanks, Catherine.